So, sometime last year, a little game came out called Doom Eternal, and it seems like a lot of people really like it. In fact, if you have not played it and you're wondering if you should, then the answer is yes. Doom Eternal is hands down one of my most favorite shooters that has come out in recent history. But I do want to take time to recognize some early access games that I do really think give Doom Eternal some competition. These two games are Ultra Kill and Proteus. Now I know that a lot of people are not very eager to jump into an early access game, and I get it, but these two games do have a lot of content in their current state, and only promise more, and they come from reputable publishers. But it is still up to you, and I understand if you'd rather wait for the full game to be out, so you don't get burnt out on the game before the full game is released. With all of that out of the way, let's talk about these games. Ultra Kill and Proteus are putting interesting twists on retro shooters, and are a part of the retro shooter revival, which I think was instigated by games such as Dusk and Medieval. But most likely this revival would not have been popular without the release of Doom 2016. Many great games have come out in this genre, but Ultra Kill and Proteus kinda stand above the crowd to me, and in my opinion are the best retro shooters since Dusk, which says a whole lot. So what makes these two games so special? Well, to me, the two most defining features of these two games, and retro shooters in general, are the gameplay and the art style. So let's start with the gameplay. Before I start, I think it's really important to mention that these two games are works in progress and have more features, enemies, etc. coming, so do please keep that in mind. For instance, I thought that the movement speed and pace of Proteus was rather slow when compared to the standard of modern retro shooters such as Dusk, Ultra Kill, and even Doom Eternal. But then I saw a tweet by the developer saying that a dash is in the works, which is encouraging. But don't get me wrong, it is still a fast-paced shooter because your movement speed and abilities are practically identical to the original Doom games, which is much faster than most games. But when you are comparing it to the modern retro games, it is rather slow. But to be fair, movement isn't what Proteus is focusing on. It's focusing on making a faithful recreation of the original Doom games, but with a few minor modern twists. Ultra Kill, on the other hand, is easily one of the fastest paced games, with one of the most liberating and free movement systems ever implemented in a game. Once I started to learn the movement system for Doom Eternal and started taking advantage of the meat hook in order to propel myself in the air and started fully utilizing the dashes and double jumps, then I really thought that Doom Eternal was the perfect movement system. But once I played Ultra Kill, I realized how restrictive Doom's movement system is when compared to Ultra Kill. For example, in Doom Eternal, once you're in the air, you are limited to one double jump and 2 dashes until you touch the ground again. It's likely this decision was made for balance reasons, but Ultra Kill was like, nah, screw that, and let your stamina for dashes refill while you are still in the air. The only thing that is limited while you're in the air is the amount of wall jumps you can do, which basically serves as a double jump. But you get way more height from it than Doom's double jump, and instead of one extra jump, you get 3 wall jumps that you can use until you have to touch the ground to recharge that ability again. Not to mention that a lot of enemy attacks and even some of your own weapons will launch you into the air, which is something that is disorientating at first, but once you get more skilled in the game, you'll turn this into an advantage by taking advantage of the movement system. I'm a huge fan of mechanics that lets you turn something negative into your favor, so big props to the developer for that. Also, the guns for both games are pretty sick. I do have to give huge props to Proteus for having some amazing sound design for the weapons. But the thing that makes Ultra Kill unique is that by literally bathing in the blood of your enemies, you regain health. They took the idea of Doom making finishing moves and the Flame Belch give you health and armor respectively, which encourages you to actively hunt down and confront enemies even when you are low on health. Ultra Kill encourages you to get as close as possible and blowing the enemies up so you can bathe in the blood of your enemies and heal your soul. No, video games don't make us violent. Why do you ask? I don't really want to comment much on enemies and their designs and even the weapons and their balancing and everything like that because it's still a work in progress. And the Ultra Kill developer has already announced that future enemies are coming alongside with weapon balancing tweaks, which is why I don't really want to comment on that. And in Proteus, there are definite teases to some much more difficult and unique boss type enemies, which will most likely turn into normal enemies as you progress through the game, and it gets much harder, much like Doom Eternal does. Oh yeah, and Ultra Kill does have a endless mode that is incredibly fun and I highly recommend playing. So basically, to summarize this section, the gameplay is incredibly good and is only looking like it'll get better for both of these games, which excites me. I was going to make art style its own section in the video, but I kind of realized that there wasn't much to talk about, so I decided to tack it on to the conclusion. Both of these games take full advantage of recreating the pixelated art style much like Dusk and Medieval did, and much like those games, they did it in a way that made them look really good. Ultra Kill has a much wider set of environments, but the graphics are much simpler, with the main flair and thing to notice in terms of graphics are the explosions and the blood just flying everywhere. It's emphasized to a point that the sound design will emphasize the explosions while turning down the volume of everything else when a crit is hit, and the game will go in slow motion for a second whenever the crit is hit as well. Proteus, on the other hand, is a whole different beast in terms of graphics and the technology that goes into the game. One thing that I really like is that you can choose between the 2D sprites or a full 3D model whenever it comes to enemies, which is impressive because you have to make all the models and animations separately as far as I know. But in terms of graphics, I don't really know how to describe it. It just looks really good. Proteus just looks really good, and I'm very impressed, but it is much more demanding than Ultra Kill is. But the settings can be adjusted to a point that it'll perform much better in terms of frame rates. But on the other hand, Ultra Kill doesn't really have a very robust options menu like Proteus does. But yeah, I think that's all I have to say about these games. They're incredibly fun and so far have been providing about 8 hours of gameplay each, and are both in very early access with much more content coming. And the quality so far has been very good. So far, according to the games, I'm about a third of the way through each of them, so that's a lot of content for a first-person shooter, especially done by indie developers. But again, they are in early access, so I'll leave that choice up to you. But I believe that brings the video to a close. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope that you give these games a chance either in early access or at their final releases. And until the next video, have a good one.